in the dusty reaches of the American frontier, where scorching sun beats down on cracked earth and secrets travel on the desert wind. A chance encounter can change fate forever. When a wealthy rancher named Jackson Rutherford buys a desperate young woman abandoned by her heartless husband, no one in Salt Creek could have predicted the storm of passion, betrayal, and redemption to follow. This is a story where bullet-scarred pasts clash with trembling hopes of the future, where the promise of true love stands at high noon, waiting to conquer every fear. Saddle up, the Wild West is about to break loose. The midday sun hung high above Salt Creek, a small frontier town perched at the edge of the Arizona Territory. Bleached wooden boards and creaking saloon doors bore silent witness to the lives and secrets that passed through. The tumbleweeds rolled in slow circles, swirling dust devils that seemed to carry gossip from door to door. Life in Salt Creek revolved around the Rutherford Ranch, a swath of land larger than anyone could truly comprehend, owned by a man as mysterious as he was wealthy. Jackson Rutherford had inherited the ranch from his late father, Robert Rutherford, who built it from the ground up. Robert Rutherford was said to have once entertained famous gunslingers like Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp when they drifted through the territory. Rumor had it Robert even squared off with Earp in a poker game one fateful night, each of them wagering fortunes they'd only half possessed. The stories of those nights fueled many a whiskey-fueled conversation in the local saloon, the Desert Rose. But it was Jackson Rutherford who now managed the sprawling empire of cattle, horses, and farmland. At 32, he'd spent most of his adult life fiercely dedicated to the ranch, seldom venturing into the local saloons or parties. Rumors circulated that he was once engaged to a school teacher back east, but something broke him, something that left him determined to avoid love and personal entanglements. Town gossips claimed to know everything, but the truth was locked away behind Jackson's guarded steel-gray eyes. This day, Jackson found himself in Salt Creek for routine business, stocking up on supplies, checking in with the bank, and meeting with a lawyer to finalize a neighboring land purchase. His tall stature and rugged looks always commanded a certain hush when he entered any establishment. Men in the saloon grudgingly tipped their hats in respect, while women cast him furtive glances from behind lace curtains. If Jackson ever noticed, he never let on. His mind was consistently stuck in the realm of fence lines, cattle counts, and the harsh weather that threatened his livelihood. Even as the sheriff Benjamin Wallace greeted him outside the general store, Jackson's expression was stoic. He gave a curt nod, offered a few words, and went about his business. Nothing had hinted at the extraordinary turn this simple day would take. He had no way of knowing that fate disguised in tatters and heartbreak was about to bring someone into his life. Someone who would stir old wounds he thought long dead and gone. While Jackson went about buying flour, beans, and coffee, a woman emerged at the other end of Main Street. Her name was Evelyn Laraway, and she looked to be in the worst shape of her life. Her once sparkling green eyes were dull with exhaustion, her long auburn hair matted with sweat and dust. The woman's dress was torn and filthy, and bruises marred the skin, just visible at her collar. Her trembling hands clutched a small leather satchel as though it were her last lifeline. With each unsure step, Evelyn scanned the storefronts and the occasional passers-by. Their eyes flicked over her, some with pity, some with curiosity. A few turned away in distaste. It wasn't unheard of for desperate women to show up in frontier towns abandoned by unscrupulous men who had promised love but delivered only misery. Yet there was something about the sheer vulnerability in Evelyn's eyes that set her apart. She seemed neither cunning nor resigned, but rather like someone completely lost. Evelyn had been married to a traveling merchant named Preston Laraway. He was a charming man when he wanted to be, with a silver tongue that earned him quick deals and even quicker escapes. But after a string of failed prospects, Preston's charm turned to cruelty. He drank heavily, gambled away their meager savings, and eventually turned his fists toward Evelyn whenever money or his temper grew short. On a fateful night, he lost a fortune in poker to a man from Tucson. Desperate to pay off his debt, he devised a plan he'd sell his wife to a brothel in exchange for enough cash to get him on the next stagecoach out of town. Evelyn, horrified by her husband's betrayal, fled before the transaction could take place. She'd walked for miles, riding in an occasional farmer's wagon, hoping to find some safe haven. But the West was unforgiving, and no sanctuary emerged. Her body grew weaker and weaker by the day, until eventually she reached Salt Creek, her final hope. When she stepped onto Main Street, she was too exhausted to do anything but wander aimlessly. A local stable hand named George Talbot spotted her first, noticing the frightened glimmer in her eyes. He tried to call out, but the words died on his lips. Evelyn stumbled on, guided by desperation. She clutched her satchel tighter, thinking of the only possession she had, left a small silver brooch that had belonged to her mother. If she had to, she would sell it for a meal and a safe place to rest. Rounding the corner from the general store, Jackson Rutherford almost collided with Evelyn. She was so unsteady on her feet that she barely managed to keep from collapsing into him. Jackson instinctively reached out, catching her by the shoulders. He stared into her face and saw the bruises, the shadows of fear in her eyes. A soft gasp escaped her lips, as if she were momentarily disoriented by the strong, unexpected contact. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Jackson asked. His voice was firm, but tinted with concern. Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, but no words came, only a faint rasp. Clearly she was dehydrated. Jackson's gaze flicked toward the satchel in her hand, but he kept his questions to himself. Before he knew it, the sheriff was by his side. "Miss, you don't look well," Benjamin Wallace observed, taking in Evelyn's ragged appearance. His tone was gentle. In a small town like Salt Creek, there was no shortage of empathy for wanderers, even if the horizon was filled with them. Evelyn tried again to speak, and this time words formed. I need help," she managed. "A place to stay. Just for a while." Jackson saw the raw desperation in her eyes. Something in him tugged something he hadn't felt in a long time, a protective urge. Sheriff Wallace tipped his hat. "She might rest at the doc's place, or maybe Martha at the boarding house has a bed." At that moment, an older woman named Lucy Browning, once the fiancée of a miner who never returned, stepped out of the store. She observed the scene with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She recognized that kind of desperation, having once been desperate herself. "The doc's out of town," Lucy said abruptly. "Gone to Tucson for medicine. Be another week before he's back." Sheriff Wallace frowned. That left only Martha's boarding house as the immediate option. But that place came with a cost. Rumor said Martha's was a front for less respectable activities at night. Jackson's jaw tightened. Instinct kicked in. If this woman went there, she might find herself in even worse danger. Jackson felt a swirl of confusion and protective instinct rising in him. What business was it of his? He had avoided close ties with people for so long, especially women with complicated pasts. And yet something about her eyes, her vulnerability, reminded him of a promise he had once broken to another woman a lifetime ago. He couldn't just leave her to the wolves. Finally, he said, "I'll help her. I have a wagon here. Let's get her some water first, and then maybe I can arrange something at my ranch for a few days. She looks like she won't survive another night in the open." The sheriff nodded. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears of relief, though she was too weak to offer more than a faint whisper of thanks. Jackson helped her onto a bench outside the general store and poured water from his canteen into a tin cup. Evelyn drank gratefully, the water cooling her parched throat. Thus began an unlikely partnership. A wealthy, reclusive rancher and a destitute, desperate woman with nowhere to go. Jackson wasted no time. He carefully helped Evelyn into his wagon, while Sheriff Wallace loaded the few supplies she carried. Onlookers gawked, but nobody dared speak against Jackson's decision. Whether it was fear of the Rutherford name or genuine respect, the townsfolk kept their opinions to themselves, at least publicly. As the wagon clattered away from Salt Creek, Evelyn stared at the receding town with a swirl of anxiety and gratitude. She felt the rough wooden seat digging into her legs, but drew comfort from Jackson's presence. He didn't speak his expression as stone-like as the rocky hills around them, but the mere fact that someone had extended a hand gave her hope. Miles of dusty trail stretched ahead. Evelyn periodically glanced at Jackson out of the corner of her eye, wondering what sort of man he truly was. Rich ranchers didn't usually rescue stranded women without expecting something in return. Her mind, shaped by fear from her husband's cruelty, wandered to all kinds of grim possibilities. Yet she could sense a quiet compassion in Jackson that didn't fit the mold of a typical opportunist. They arrived at the Rutherford Ranch around sunset. Evelyn was in awe of the sprawling property. Dozens of horses grazed in the corral, and the flickering lights of bunkhouses dotted the horizon. The main ranch house stood as a beacon atop a gentle rise, its porch illuminated by lanterns. Ranch hands bustled about, finishing chores for the day, each nodding respectfully at Jackson as he passed. Some cast curious glances at the unfamiliar woman in his wagon. Whispers traveled quickly, but no one dared question him outright. Jackson guided the horses to a stop and helped Evelyn down. "You'll stay in the guest room for now," he said plainly. "My housekeeper, Maria, will see to your needs. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Evelyn felt her cheeks flush with equal measures of gratitude and unease. She barely knew this man, but her situation left her with few options. Inside, the warmth of the ranch house enveloped her. Maria, a robust woman with graying hair, immediately fussed over Evelyn like a mother hen. She had worked for the Rutherfords for decades and was fiercely loyal. While Jackson excused himself to see to his ranch affairs, Maria led Evelyn upstairs to a cozy bedroom with a simple but inviting bed. "You look half dead, child," Maria said, smoothing the clean sheets. "You rest. I'll bring you something to eat." "No questions, not yet. I can see you've been through enough." She offered a reassuring smile that made Evelyn's eyes fill with tears. It had been too long since anyone had shown her genuine kindness. Evelyn took in the tidy room, the handmade quilt, the small dresser, a window overlooking the ranch yard. It was more comfort than she'd known in months. She sank onto the bed, feeling the tension in her body start to uncoil. Yes, she still feared what might come next, but for the moment, she had a roof over her head and a gentle soul bringing her food. Downstairs, Jackson poured himself a stiff drink. He looked out the window at the last glow of sunset, fading over the distant hills. His mind churned. He'd just brought a complete stranger to his home, a woman with no money, no home, and a bruised face that spoke volumes about her past. He told himself it was the right thing to do, that any decent man would have done the same. Yet a voice inside him whispered that it was also more than that. Something about her vulnerability called to a part of him he had tried to bury for years. Night settled over Rutherford Ranch, bringing the cool hush of desert darkness. Evelyn ate the meal Maria brought: stew, fresh bread, and water, before collapsing into a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in weeks. Meanwhile, Jackson sat at his desk in the study, the low lamp revealing papers related to his latest land purchase. He tried to focus on the numbers, the contracts, but found his thoughts drifting to the woman sleeping upstairs. Years ago, Jackson had watched helplessly as his mother, Elizabeth Rutherford, suffered in an abusive marriage. Robert Rutherford wasn't physically cruel, but his endless gambling and restless temperament drained Elizabeth's spirit. In those final years of her life, she became a shell of the vibrant woman Jackson remembered from childhood. When she passed, he swore never to stand by and watch another woman suffer at the hands of a man. Perhaps that vow still held sway, even after all these years. But there was also an incident in Jackson's more recent past that shaped his demeanor. He had been engaged to a sweet school teacher named Clara Whitmore back east. He loved her deeply, or so he believed. However, the call of duty to the Rutherford Ranch pulled him away. She pleaded for him to stay with her back east, or to at least let her come to the ranch. Jackson, in his pride, refused both. He left to take over the ranch after his father's passing, promising to send for Clara. That promise was never fulfilled. By the time Jackson was ready, Clara had moved on, marrying another man. Rumor had it, she died in childbirth soon after. The guilt and regret from that broken love festered in Jackson's heart, convincing him it was safer to keep people at arm's length. Now, a battered woman was under his roof, and Jackson couldn't deny the surge of protectiveness that overcame him. He took a final sip of whiskey before blowing out the lamp, hoping a good night's rest would clear his head. But sleep came fitfully haunted by memories and the echo of Evelyn's frightened eyes. The next morning dawned with a pale golden light spreading across the wide skies. Roosters crowed and ranch hands rose early to tend to the horses and cattle. Evelyn awoke to the sound of boots clomping downstairs, plates clattering in the kitchen, and the faint hiss of coffee on the stove. She washed her face in the basin Maria had left for her, smoothing her tangled hair as best she could. The bruises on her arms ached, but she felt stronger than she had in days. Tentatively, she made her way downstairs, unsure of what awaited her. Maria greeted her warmly, dishing out scrambled eggs and bacon onto a plate. "Sit, child. You need your strength," she said, pushing the plate across the table. The comforting aroma of hot food made Evelyn's stomach rumble. She offered a grateful smile, still too shy to say much. Moments later, Jackson walked in. He removed his hat, nodding at Maria, before settling his gaze on Evelyn. The sunlight streaming through the kitchen window illuminated the soft lines of her face. She looked far more presentable today, despite the fading bruises. Jackson's own face was calm, but his eyes held questions. Morning he greeted simply. Evelyn nodded, swallowing a bite of eggs. Jackson cleared his throat. "I figure we should talk about your situation, but you take your time eating. I can wait." Evelyn suddenly found her appetite diminishing under the weight of the conversation to come. She forced a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Maria, sensing the tension, made herself busy at the sink. Evelyn finished her meal in silence, and when she was done, Jackson gestured for her to follow him to the study. The room was lined with leather-bound books and framed sketches of the ranch's early days. Jackson settled behind the desk, arms folded. "Mind telling me what happened to you?" he asked softly. Though his tone was even, there was a clear undercurrent of concern. Evelyn took a shaky breath. In halting words, she recounted her story. Preston's gambling, his growing debt, and his eventual betrayal in trying to sell her to cover what he owed. She didn't omit the nights he struck her, nor the vile words he used. She explained how she fled with only the clothes on her back and the silver brooch from her mother. Jackson listened without interruption, his jaw tightening. Once she finished, there was a lingering hush in the study. Finally he spoke, voice low. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. No one deserves it." Evelyn brushed at tears threatening to fall. "I don't know where to go now. I don't have family left. I have no money, nothing." She paused. "If you want me to leave, I understand. I've caused you enough trouble." Jackson leaned forward. "You're safe here," he said. "I won't toss you out on the street." He considered his next words carefully. "If it suits you, you can stay on as a housekeeper or help Maria with the cooking, sewing, cleaning, whatever tasks need to be done until you're back on your feet. You'll be paid a fair wage." His offer stunned Evelyn, who had expected at best a temporary refuge. She managed a grateful nod. "Thank you. I'll do whatever's needed." Jackson's expression softened just a hint. "You should know, though, that people will talk. I've never brought a woman to my ranch before. But I'll handle it." He paused. "You have my word. You're safe here." Evelyn let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She whispered her thanks, tears shimmering in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. The news spread through Salt Creek like a brush fire in a high wind. Jackson Rutherford had brought a mysterious woman to live at his ranch. Some said she was a runaway prostitute. Others claimed she was his secret lover. Lucy Browning, never one to miss a chance to gossip, told everyone that Jackson had bought this woman from a traveling peddler. Of course, the real story was lost in the rumor mill. Sheriff Wallace, aware of Evelyn's plight, did what he could to dispel the more malicious rumors. He had no reason to doubt Jackson's intentions. Nevertheless, small-town talk can cut deeper than a rancher's lasso, and the gossip quickly mutated into wild tales. By the end of the week, one overheard conversation suggested Evelyn was a spy from a rival ranch aiming to sabotage Jackson's cattle. Another rumor declared she was a murderess on the run. Such was life in the frontier, idle tongues and endless speculation. Jackson ignored the gossip. His focus remained on running the ranch, expanding his lands, and ensuring Evelyn adapted to her new duties. Maria guided her in domestic tasks, teaching her the subtle art of ranch cooking, from hearty stews to perfect flapjacks that kept hungry workers fueled through long days. Evelyn threw herself into the work with fervor, grateful for the distraction from her traumatic memories. A few ranch hands, curious about the newcomer, were friendly enough. Hank, a seasoned cowboy with a weathered face, complimented Evelyn's cooking more than once. Bobby, a young stable hand, clumsily offered to teach her how to ride a horse. Through these small gestures, she began to feel a sense of belonging she had never known before. Despite Jackson's stony exterior, Evelyn often caught him watching her from a distance, as if measuring her progress or ensuring her safety. An unspoken tension danced between them, neither romantic nor indifferent, but something complicated and fragile. When their eyes met, she felt a warmth that frightened her, a reminder that she was not entirely free from the scars her husband left behind. For Jackson, he found himself torn between his vow to remain aloof and the stirring desire to help this woman heal. Just as the days seemed to be settling into a manageable routine, fate threw another curveball. Late one evening after dinner, plates had been cleared and the ranch hands had retired. Evelyn decided to take a brief walk under the stars. She ambled across the yard, the cool desert breeze soothing her bruised soul. From across the corral, she saw Jackson leaning against a fence post silhouetted against the moonlit sky. She approached softly. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice a gentle murmur. He half turned, nodding in acknowledgement. "Lots on my mind," he replied simply. Silence stretched between them, the night air thick with unspoken possibilities. Suddenly a gunshot rang out, echoing across the open fields. Both Jackson and Evelyn froze. A second shot sliced through the silence. Jackson cursed under his breath, grabbing Evelyn's arm and pulling her to the ground behind a wooden trough. Lights flared on in the bunkhouses as ranch hands rushed out, rifles in hand. Jackson peered over the edge of the trough, scanning for movement. "Stay here," he hissed at Evelyn. Before she could protest, he sprinted toward the barn, ducking behind crates, hand on his holstered revolver. Another shot cut through the darkness, splintering a fence post near him. He saw a figure running along the fence line, someone tall and lean, wearing a dark coat. The intruder fired once more, the muzzle flash illuminating a pale face twisted in determination. Jackson recognized the culprit, Jonah Tolliver, a rancher who owned land adjacent to Rutherford's. Jonah had harbored a grudge against Jackson for years, claiming Jackson's father, Robert, cheated his own father out of prime grazing territory decades before. Jackson knew Jonah had grown more desperate in recent months. Land disputes, water rights, and pride fueled a simmering tension that threatened to erupt into open violence. Yet until now, Jonah had stayed on his side of the boundary. This nighttime attack signaled a dangerous escalation. Ranch hands closed in on Jonah, exchanging a few more rounds of gunfire. Sensing he was outnumbered, Jonah ran for his horse, tied just beyond the corral. A final shot echoed, and then he was gone, leaving behind confusion and one injured ranch hand, a bullet grazing Hank's arm. Evelyn remained crouched behind the trough, heart pounding until Jackson found her. He helped her to her feet, checking her for injuries. The concern in his eyes was unmistakable. Shaken, she merely nodded to signal she was unharmed. "We'll talk about this in the morning," he told the assembled ranch hands. "Hank, let's get that arm patched up." His voice was tight, anger simmering just below the surface. Inside him brewed a swirl of emotions. Fury at Jonah, concern for Evelyn, and the painful reminder that violence in the West was a fact of life. Yet the idea that the ranch could become a war zone made him clench his fists in dismay. That night, no one slept well. The wind howled over the plains as though warning that more darkness lay ahead. In the coming days, security at the ranch tightened. Jackson insisted on nightly patrols, and he ordered extra lumber to reinforce the fences. Evelyn sensed his tension, noticing his jaw muscles clench each time he looked out toward Jonah's property. While the attack left the ranch on edge, a different sort of threat was brewing in Salt Creek. Preston Laraway. Evelyn's estranged husband arrived in town, looking for his lost property. Word of Jackson's kindness to a mysterious woman had reached the nearby settlement of Pecos, where Preston happened to be holed up in a saloon, like a bloodhound catching a scent. He rode to Salt Creek, determined to reclaim Evelyn, or at least to exact revenge on the man who had interfered with his devious plan. Preston was a wiry, cunning man, with a perpetual sneer curling his thin lips. He wore a fraying jacket and reeked of stale alcohol and desperation. Sheriff Wallace recognized the type instantly, a rat scurrying through the territory, feeding on others' misery. When Preston swaggered into the Desert Rose Saloon, conversation halted. Lucy Browning, perched at the bar, recognized him from Evelyn's description. Tension coiled in the air. Preston glared around the room, ignoring the silent stares. He found an empty stool, ordering a shot of whiskey. Downing it in one gulp, he slammed the glass on the counter. He beckoned Lucy closer. She pretended to be aloof, but curiosity got the better of her. "What do you want?" she asked. Preston sneered. "Heard there's a woman holed up at Rutherford Ranch." "My wife. Need to collect her, see." Lucy frowned. "From what I hear, she left you for good reason." "Oh, she did she?" Preston scoffed. "Well, that's between me and her. Once I get her back, I'll be on my way, unless Rutherford wants to purchase her properly." His lips curled into a smug grin, oblivious to the disgust twisting Lucy's face. Sheriff Wallace, who'd been nursing a drink at a corner table, rose quietly. He walked up behind Preston, laying a hand on the man's shoulder. "We don't much appreciate that kind of talk around here," the sheriff said, voice calm but dangerously firm. "If you've got grievances with your wife, you'll handle them through the law, not by peddling her like livestock." Preston jerked his shoulder away. "Law!" He spat on the floor. "That's a laugh. She's my wife and she's run off. I've a right to see her." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Not in my town, you don't. If Evelyn doesn't want to see you, I'll have your hide for trespassing. Understood?" Preston snorted, reaching for another shot. "We'll see about that, Sheriff." Word of Preston's arrival spread rapidly, eventually reaching Jackson's ranch. When Jackson heard, his face turned to stone. Evelyn, upon learning the news, felt panic twist her gut. She had barely begun to feel safe. Now the man who had hurt her most in life was here brazenly claiming her as property. Jackson immediately dispatched a rider to the ranch boundaries, with instructions to let him know if any unknown person approached. He gathered his most trusted ranch hands, advising them to keep a watchful eye. More pressing than Jonah Tolliver's land feud was the immediate threat Preston posed to Evelyn. Jackson vowed that no harm would come to her again under his roof. Despite the swirling threats, life on the ranch continued. Cattle needed feeding, fences needed mending. Evelyn threw herself into her chores, but an undercurrent of dread remained. She feared Preston's return, the possibility that he'd strike when she least expected it. Just days after Preston's arrival in town, he showed up at the ranch's main gate, reeking of whiskey and bravado. He shouted curses, demanding to see Evelyn. Bobby, the young stable hand, rushed to inform Jackson, who strode out, rifle in hand, flanked by Hank and 3 other hands. Evelyn watched nervously from an upstairs window, heart pounding. Jackson halted a short distance from Preston, raising his rifle, casually but clearly prepared to use it. "You've got no business here," he stated plainly. Preston sneered. "I've come for my wife. Hand her over, and I won't press charges for kidnapping." A bitter laugh escaped Jackson's lips. "Kidnapping? You have some nerve, Laraway. This woman came here of her own free will. The sheriff knows the truth of it. Sheriff can't stop me from claiming what's rightfully mine," Preston growled. "If you want to keep her, then pay me." He smirked, revealing stained teeth. "Let's call it a fair trade. I'm a reasonable man, after all." Disgust rippled through Jackson. The idea of buying Evelyn from this scoundrel churned his stomach. Yet he also knew Preston might continue to harass or even harm Evelyn unless something definitive was done. He had the money, but the thought of stooping to such a transaction, it was appalling. Hank stepped forward, face flushed with anger. "You son of a," he began, but Jackson held up a hand, silencing him. "Name your price," Jackson said, voice tight. In the upstairs window, Evelyn gasped, tears welling. Was this what her freedom boiled down to, a lump sum of cash? Preston scratched his stubbled chin. $1,000. It was a vast sum in those days, enough to buy a decent house or start a new life. "You pay me, I sign away any claims on her. You got my word." Jackson bristled at the mention of Preston's word, but he measured the alternative. Constant threats, or worse. He nodded slowly, hating himself for legitimizing the notion of a man selling another human being. But for Evelyn's peace, he'd do it. "Wait here," Jackson said, turning on his heel. He went inside, heading straight to his safe. Evelyn stood in the hallway, trembling. She couldn't control the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Don't do it," she pleaded. "I'm not worth that kind of money." Jackson exhaled, pained. "Yes, you are," he said softly. "Besides, he'll keep harassing you unless we put a stop to it now." He counted out the cash, a sum that felt heavier in his hands than any money he'd ever handled. This was more than a simple transaction. It was an act of defiance against everything vile in the world. If that meant paying the devil, so be it. Returning to the gate, Jackson tossed the stack of bills at Preston's feet. "Take it," he growled. "Now get off my land." Preston greedily gathered the money, his eyes glinting. "She's yours," he said with a twisted grin. "Pleasure doing business." He mounted his horse, stuffed the cash into his saddlebag, and galloped away, leaving dust clouds in his wake. An uneasy silence fell as Jackson and his men watched Preston vanish into the horizon. They all felt the same rancid taste in their mouths. Buying a man's wife was an ugly transaction. But if it gave Evelyn her peace, Jackson would bear that burden. Evelyn rushed out, tears staining her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she choked. "He made a mockery of you, of both of us." Jackson gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "He can't hurt you anymore," he said. "That's what matters." Though the money might have stung, her safety was priceless to him. In the weeks after Preston's departure, a palpable shift occurred between Jackson and Evelyn. The tension surrounding her uncertain status eased somewhat, replaced by a cautious sense of freedom on her part. She no longer jumped at every shadow, no longer flinched at casual touches. The knowledge that Jackson had quite literally bought her freedom weighed on her, but it also underscored the depth of his kindness. Jackson, for his part, was more present around the house. He often asked Evelyn how she was feeling, or if she needed anything for her chores. A hesitant friendship grew between them, bolstered by mutual respect and an unspoken understanding of each other's wounded hearts. As the ranch thrived, so did Evelyn. She learned to ride horses under Bobby's guidance, surprising everyone with her natural balance and gentle way with the animals. She even developed a bond with a chestnut mare named Sadie, who was known to be temperamental. Under Evelyn's gentle touch, Sadie calmed, allowing rides with an unusual obedience. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jackson found Evelyn in the corral brushing Sadie's mane. He paused at the gate, observing quietly before clearing his throat. "You're getting good with her," he said, stepping forward. Evelyn smiled, patting Sadie's flank. "She's sweet once you understand her," she replied. Sadie nuzzled her shoulder in appreciation. Jackson shifted his weight, gazing at the horizon where a line of purple mountains stood like silent sentinels. I used to have a horse when I was a kid. Named her Blossom. She was the first one that was truly mine, a gift from my father. Lost her in a flash flood one summer. Never forgot that day. His voice grew soft, tinged with old sorrow. Evelyn looked at him, understanding that behind his stern exterior he carried his own share of scars. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Jackson nodded, meeting her eyes. The air between them crackled with an energy neither fully understood, but both felt. They stood like that for a moment, sharing a silent comfort that needed no words. Then Jackson cleared his throat. "I was thinking of heading to town for some supplies. If you feel up to it, you could come along." He paused, almost shy. "We could use a few items for the house that I'm not too good at picking out myself." Evelyn recognized the invitation for what it was, a gesture of trust and companionship. She nodded, a small smile lighting her face. "I'd like that," she replied. Their trip to Salt Creek the next day was a quiet affair, both feeling a slight awkwardness at appearing together in public. True to frontier gossip, tongues wagged as soon as they pulled up to the general store. Lucy Browning, despite her meddling, offered Evelyn a genuine if curious greeting. They passed by the Desert Rose Saloon. Evelyn tensed, recalling the last time she had entered a saloon with Preston. Jackson noticed, gently placing a reassuring hand on her elbow. Sheriff Wallace, standing across the street, tipped his hat. All quiet on the Western Front, he quipped, referencing the general calm after Preston's departure. But in a small town, trouble is never far off. Just as Jackson finished loading supplies into the wagon, a chilling shout rang out. Rutherford Jonah Tolliver stood at the edge of the dusty street, a revolver strapped to his thigh. He looked wild, unhinged. A large, fresh scar marred his forehead, a souvenir from the night he tried to shoot up Jackson's ranch. Jackson stiffened. He glanced at Evelyn, whose eyes widened in alarm. "Stay behind the wagon," he muttered, stepping forward to face Jonah. A small crowd began to form, drawn by the prospect of a showdown. "You cheated my father out of his land," Jonah snarled. "And you humiliated me in front of your men. This ends today." "I didn't cheat anyone," Jackson replied coolly. "My father bought that land fair and square. You don't want to do this, Jonah. Think of your wife, your kids." Jonah snorted. "My family left me when the bank took our property. Property that should have been mine if your father hadn't tricked us. We lost everything." Jackson's fingers hovered near his holster. He noticed the mania in Jonah's eyes, the tremor in his hand as he reached for his gun. This was a man with nothing left to lose. "We can settle this peacefully," Jackson offered, though he doubted Jonah would listen. "No more talk," Jonah growled, drawing his revolver. Jackson moved like lightning, whipping out his own gun. Shots cracked, echoing off the wooden storefronts. Folks dived for cover. Evelyn cowered behind the wagon, heart hammering. When the smoke cleared, Jonah lay sprawled on the ground, clutching his shoulder. His revolver lay uselessly near his fingers. Jackson's bullet had struck true, but without taking Jonah's life. Jackson stood over him, chest heaving, face pale. The reality of nearly killing a man, even in self-defense, left him shaken. Sheriff Wallace rushed forward, kicking Jonah's gun away and calling for the doctor. Panting, Jonah glared up at Jackson, eyes filled with hatred. "You'll pay for this," he spat, though the threat rang hollow in his wounded state. Wallace looked around at the silent crowd. "Show's over," he barked. "Anyone want to dispute Jackson's right to defend himself?" No one. dared. The tension lifted slightly as Jonah was dragged to the makeshift jail where he'd await medical attention and likely trial for attempted murder. Jackson turned to find Evelyn. She stood rigid, tears in her eyes, hands shaking. He slipped his gun into its holster and pulled her close, ignoring the onlookers. "It's over," he whispered, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his own. For a brief moment, they clung to each other as relief and fear collided in the dusty air of Salt Creek. That evening they returned to the ranch in a pensive silence. Evelyn helped Maria prepare supper, but neither had much appetite. After the meal, Jackson retreated to the porch, his gaze locked onto the sky now painted with brilliant streaks of sunset. Unable to rest, Evelyn ventured outside and found him leaning against the railing, arms crossed. She approached softly, standing by his side. "You did what you had to," she said, trying to offer comfort. The memory of the gunfight still loomed fresh. Jackson nodded, exhaling slowly. "This life. It's all I've ever known. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth the bloodshed." He glanced at her. In that moment, with the dying sun illuminating her face, she looked both fragile and resilient. Evelyn placed a tentative hand on his shoulder. "You have a good heart, Jackson. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You're trying to defend what's yours without succumbing to hatred." Something in her voice or her touch cracked the careful composure he maintained. He swallowed hard. "I spent years shutting people out. Seeing my mother suffer losing someone I once loved. I thought I'd be safer alone." Evelyn's hand trembled, but she kept it on his shoulder. "I felt that way after Preston. Thought I could never trust anyone again. But you showed me. There's kindness left in this world." She looked at him, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You made me believe I could be worth something." The softness in his eyes deepened. "You're worth everything, Evelyn," he said quietly. "Don't ever doubt that." In the hush of that summer evening, with crickets chirping and a warm breeze drifting across the desert, they finally surrendered to the silent truth they had both been fighting. Slowly, tentatively, Jackson bent his head, and Evelyn tilted hers, their lips meeting in a gentle kiss that spoke of healing and unspoken promises. When they broke apart, neither spoke of love. It was too soon, too raw. But in that shared kiss, they found a solace deeper than any words could convey. Over the next few days, the wheels of frontier justice turned. Jonah Tolliver remained in jail charged with attempted murder. He would soon face a territorial judge who would ride through Salt Creek on circuit. Preston Laraway, meanwhile, had vanished from the region, presumably spending his ill-gotten cash in some faraway saloon. Life at the ranch settled into a cautious calm. Word of Jackson and Evelyn's growing closeness spread among the ranch hands. Some teased Jackson good-naturedly, while others gave quiet support to Evelyn, welcoming her as part of the ranch family. Maria, in particular, beamed like a proud aunt every time she saw the two share a moment. One afternoon, the door of the ranch house burst open, revealing a telegram messenger panting from his hard ride. Jackson, seated at the dining table, poring over accounts, looked up in surprise. The telegram was from an Arizona land office official, a new opportunity to expand Rutherford Ranch if Jackson could travel to Phoenix to finalize the deal in person. The property in question was prime grazing land, a potential game-changer for the ranch's future. But the letter also hinted at a rival bidder from Texas, meaning Jackson's immediate departure might be necessary to secure the land. The idea of leaving the ranch and Evelyn unprotected stirred anxiety. Yet turning down such a lucrative expansion would be a grave mistake for his business. That evening, Jackson confided in Evelyn. "I'm torn," he admitted, pacing the parlor floor. "I need to go to Phoenix to close this deal, but leaving you here with only the ranch hands and Maria, it feels dangerous. We haven't fully resolved the threat from Jonah's men, or if Preston might slither back." Evelyn offered him a reassuring smile. "You've done so much to protect me. Let me protect your interests now. The ranch has stable hands, guns, and the sheriff is only a ride away. I won't be alone." Jackson studied her determined expression. She had grown so much from the frightened woman he found stumbling into town. Now she carried herself with quiet strength. He exhaled and nodded. "If you're sure." "I am," she affirmed. "This place has become my home. I'll do everything I can to keep it safe." His eyes flickered with gratitude. "I'll leave in 2 days, then." The morning Jackson set off the ranch was alive with activity. Hank and Bobby helped him load a small wagon with supplies for the journey. Maria packed enough provisions to last several days. Evelyn watched from the porch, her heart heavy, but her resolve firm. Before he climbed into the driver's seat, Jackson walked over to her, taking her hands in his. "I'll be back in a week," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, don't take any chances. If there's trouble, ride to Salt Creek or wire me in Phoenix." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'll be careful," she promised. Their goodbye kiss was brief but tender, witnessed by amused ranch hands who quickly busied themselves elsewhere. The wagon rattled away, leaving a cloud of dust. Evelyn stood on the porch until Jackson's figure vanished on the horizon. For a few days, all seemed well. She busied herself overseeing the household, helping the workers with chores, and making small improvements around the ranch. The nights were lonely, though. She missed Jackson's presence, the low rumble of his voice during evening conversations, the way he'd sometimes brush her hair back when he thought she didn't notice. On the 4th night of Jackson's absence, a sudden commotion startled the ranch. Flames leapt from the barn, bright against the black sky. Bobby burst into the house, shouting, "Fire! Fire!" Everyone sprang into action, grabbing buckets of water, forming a line from the well to the barn. Smoke billowed, choking and acrid, as burning embers flew into the wind. Evelyn's heart pounded. This wasn't an accident. She was certain of it. The barn was securely maintained, with no loose lanterns or stored hay near flames. She joined the bucket brigade, passing sloshing pails of water to douse the inferno. Maria coughed and sputtered, tears streaming as the smoke stung her eyes. Hours felt like minutes in the chaos. Eventually the fire was contained, though the barn was severely damaged and 3 horses lost. Bobby stumbled upon footprints near the back entrance, boot prints that led away into the darkness. Whoever had done this was gone, leaving devastation and heartbreak in their wake. Exhausted and drenched in sweat, Evelyn surveyed the damage at dawn. She was reminded with brutal clarity that the ranch and her life remained under threat. Whether it was Jonah's cohorts, Preston, or a new enemy, she couldn't be sure. But she knew one thing: she had to protect Jackson's legacy, no matter the cost. Despite the barn's destruction, the spirit of the ranch hands remained unbroken. They rebuilt the structure piece by piece, forging a tighter bond in the shared adversity. Evelyn, determined not to let fear rule her, took on even more responsibility, organizing work details, ensuring extra vigilance on night patrols. One afternoon, as she was helping Maria in the kitchen, she heard Hank's urgent shout outside. Racing to the porch, she saw him pointing out past the corral. A lone rider was approaching at a gallop, dust cloud trailing behind. Evelyn's heart lurched, but as the rider grew closer, she recognized Sheriff Wallace. He dismounted, breathing heavily. "I've got news." Jonah Tolliver escaped custody while being transferred to the territorial judge. Killed a deputy took his horse. Some folks think he might be headed this way. A cold dread spread through Evelyn. The barn fire might have been Jonah's doing or someone working for him. She realized time was running short for Jackson to return, and every day he stayed away heightened the danger. Sheriff Wallace looked around, assessing the ranch's defenses. "I can station a couple of my deputies here at least until Jackson gets back," he offered. "But I've got limited manpower." "Please do," Evelyn replied, her voice tense. "We can't handle another attack alone." By nightfall, 2 stern-faced deputies rode in rifles at the ready. The ranch hands maintained patrols, everyone on edge. As the moon rose high, the desert air turned chilly, and the ranch seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn stood on the porch with a lantern scanning the darkness. Her nerves were taut as wires, but a flicker of determination shone in her eyes. She refused to cower. She'd left that helplessness behind with Preston's departure. A crack of gunfire shattered the silence. Shouts followed. Evelyn's heart thundered as she blew out the lantern and ducked inside. She heard hooves pounding, men shouting orders. The fight was on. Hank sprinted past the window, returning fire at a shadowy figure lurking by the corral. Another shot rang out, and a deputy cried in pain. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Evelyn peeked outside, seeing Jonah's unmistakable silhouette among a small group of armed men. They advanced on the ranch house bullets, ricocheting off walls and wood. Maria cowered behind the kitchen table, praying aloud. Evelyn's pulse hammered in her temples. She grabbed the revolver Jackson had left behind. She didn't want to kill anyone, but she had to protect herself and those she cared about. Steeling her nerves, she crouched by a window and took aim at a dark figure creeping toward the back door. The shot rang out, sending sparks of orange in the night. The figure crumpled, letting out a scream. She forced down the wave of nausea that rose within her. Survival overshadowed remorse. Minutes felt like hours in the brutal exchange of gunfire. Jonah's men, outnumbered by the ranch hands and deputies, started to retreat. But Jonah himself wouldn't back down. She saw him stalking closer, reloading his gun with shaking hands, eyes wild with rage. Just as he aimed at Hank, a thunder of hooves announced new arrivals. Lantern light and gunshots erupted from the rear. Evelyn's breath caught. Jackson had returned, leading several men from the neighboring ranch who had agreed to help him. Taken by surprise, Jonah spun around, but was too slow to dodge Jackson's bullet. It struck him in the leg, sending him sprawling. The fight ended as quickly as it began. Jonah's men either surrendered or fled into the night. Jonah himself lay groaning, cursing Jackson's name between ragged breaths. Jackson dismounted, rushing up to Evelyn. She was covered in dust and tears streaked her cheeks. But she was alive. They fell into each other's arms, hearts pounding with relief and adrenaline. Around them, ranch hands scrambled to secure prisoners and tend to the wounded. Firelight from the fallen lanterns cast a flickering glow on the battered yard. But in that moment, all Evelyn could focus on was the solid warmth of Jackson's embrace, the fact that they had survived yet another trial. Dawn broke over a battered but unbowed ranch. Jonah Tolliver, wounded and seething, was hauled away to face justice. Inside, Jackson and Evelyn tended to wounds both physical and emotional. The ranch bore scars, shattered windows, scorched fences. but it stood just like them. Later on the porch swing, Evelyn and Jackson found a quiet moment. He apologized for not being there sooner. She shook her head gently. "You came when it mattered," she whispered, her hand over his. The bond forged between them had deepened through fire and fear. Evelyn, once broken and discarded, now sat with strength in her spine and purpose in her heart. Jackson, long closed off by past regrets, saw in her a partner who understood both pain and resilience. As the sun set in soft pastels, Jackson knelt before her. "I never thought I'd feel alive again. But I don't want a future without you," he said, voice shaking. "Marry me." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, joy breaking through years of sorrow. She nodded, too overcome to speak her answer clear in her trembling smile. In that moment, hope returned, true and unshakable, on the wind that whispered across the wild frontier. Jackson and Evelyn's wedding was simple, heartfelt, and perfect for the rugged land they called home. Held in the ranch yard, wildflowers and lanterns framed the scene. Sheriff Wallace officiated, and Maria beamed like family. Evelyn wore a modest gown borrowed from a kind neighbor. Jackson looked proud and at peace. Lucy Browning wept, swearing off gossip if only for the day. Hank fiddled cheerful tunes, while Bobby served as Jackson's best man. When vows were exchanged under the setting sun, cheers erupted and hats flew into the air. For the first time, Evelyn felt truly chosen, not out of desperation, but love. Later, away from the crowd, they stood at the edge of the ranch, hand in hand beneath the stars. They kissed softly, knowing the road behind them had been long, but the one ahead now stretched wide with promise. The wealthy rancher and the abandoned wife had found not just each other, but freedom, peace, and purpose. Their story, born in hardship, had become legend, and under the endless sky of the Wild West, they began a new life side by side. In the scorched heart of the Arizona Territory, where a young woman's hope was all but lost, and a solitary rancher's heart lay hidden behind steeled walls, fate delivered an unexpected redemption. Through betrayal, gunfights, and whispered rumors in the dusty streets of Salt Creek, they forged an unbreakable bond that triumphed over fear and despair. Evelyn's spirit rose like a phoenix from the ashes of her past, and Jackson discovered that true strength wasn't in wealth or power, but in kindness and love. Their union became a beacon of hope, proving that wounds can heal, and hearts long turned to stone can beat with renewed life. Thank you for joining us on this sweeping journey across the Wild West. If you enjoyed this tale of resilience, redemption, and unexpected love, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Together, let's keep these legends alive.